Well, Pat, up next we're going to meet Bettye Shelton. She's the wife of country superstar Ricky Van Shelton. You'll find out why she chose to stand by her man when we come back. Plenty of money, a dream house, life in the limelight, all of these belong to our next guest as the wife of a country music superstar.
Male Artist of the Year is Ricky Van Shelton. Ricky Van Shelton.
Ricky Van Shelton. Favorite male vocalist is Ricky Van Shelton.
And your Entertainer of the Year is Ricky Van Shelton.
But beneath all this glitz, the Sheltons' marriage was crumbling. And had it not been for a phone call from a woman she hardly knew, Bettye Shelton might not be Mrs. Ricky Van Shelton today. Please welcome to the 700 Club the co-authors of the book She Stays. From Nashville, Tennessee, Bettye Shelton and the woman who made that crucial phone call, Andy Landis. Welcome to both of you. It's great to have you here. Thank you. God bless you. Bettye, let's go back, if we can, to the fall of 1990. What was the state of your relationship with Ricky at the time?
We didn't even have a relationship. There was no love in our marriage at that time. Ricky had stopped talking to me. He had stopped looking at me. He had stopped touching me. And it was just one of a wife who had been totally rejected from her husband.
What were you feeling at that time?
Desperation and loneliness. I was so miserable because we were trying to live a lie. We didn't want our families or our friends to know that the great American success was really a nightmare and that we weren't happy and could not find happiness anymore.
Andy, what caused you to make the phone call you made?
I was with her the night of her birthday, and there was a few of her friends there. Ricky wasn't in town, and it was something in her eyes when she would smile. Her smile would drop. And it was, I call it kind of a women's intuition. My first impulse was she was in a lot of pain. I prayed about it for about 2 weeks, and I could not get her off of my mind. And finally, the day I called, I had prayed. I said, okay, God, if this is from you, if you want me to do this, make it so that I know it's from you. And I woke up in the morning and couldn't get her off of my mind, and I was actually crying for her. And I called my fiance and said, can I please have her number? Called her up and said, do you remember me? I'm Andy Landis, and I think you might need someone to talk to.
What did you think when Andy called you?
I was about to do something so stupid, Terry, because of the desperation that I was in and the rejection, the loneliness. I was about to call an old boyfriend just to have a man affirm to me that I was still desirable and that I could still be a woman. And I was sitting by my phone, picking the phone up and slamming it down and picking it up, and I had just slammed it down and said, oh, dear God, help me. Just, what am I doing? What am I doing? And at that instant, when I cried out to God to help me, was when the phone rang. And I don't know, I know now, but at the time, I never picked my phone up. Ricky and I never answer our calls. And I immediately just picked it up and said, hello. And there was this voice on the other end because I barely knew Andy at the time. And she said, I thought you might need somebody to help, to talk to. And I knew that God had answered my cry to him and was sending me somebody.
Now, had you ever done anything like that before, Andy?
Yeah, I have. But the difference with Bettye was she was really receptive. And so I invited myself to her house, and we went over, and what I did was I talked to her about what God had done in my life and how God had helped me overcome so many things. And when she would start to talk about Ricky, I would tell her that I wasn't there to talk about Ricky, that I was there to talk about her. And I guess I just reminded her that God has a plan for her life, and it wasn't just about Ricky, it was about Bettye too, that she was a child of God. And the next morning we went out on the cliffs at her home, and that's when she decided to, she decided to turn over her life and her marriage to the Lord. And it was a scary moment in some ways because she had been holding on for quite some time.
How did your life change, Bettye?
Well, that morning that Andy led me in prayer, and I surrendered everything to God. And it was such a wonderful feeling because I knew that my Father God was going to take care of everything for me. I just knew in my heart, I was just like a little child. And I was so thrilled, and I knew that from that moment on, everything was going to be perfect. And the next day, Terry, my husband came home and said, "Betty, I just don't love you anymore." And I was devastated.
Talk about the enemy trying to pull the rug out from under you.
Because it was like, wait a minute, God, no, wait, I just gave my life to you.
Where's my answer?
Yeah. But there was this little voice inside of me, and it was Andy's voice, because she had kept telling me that morning, you've got to trust God no matter what, Betty, no matter what. And she kept emphasizing that. And so when Ricky said to me, "I don't love you anymore," all the screaming and turmoil going on inside of me, I still heard Andy's voice, which I knew was God's voice, saying, "But do you trust me?" And I decided right then and there, no matter what, I'm going to trust God.
So what was going on in Ricky's life at this time?
Ricky, he was, of course, at the peak of his success, which you saw earlier. But he had also turned to alcohol. And so he was hurting so badly. He was looking for happiness in all the wrong places. Mostly he kept turning to alcohol. He was turning to other women. He wouldn't, like I said earlier, he wouldn't look at me because of the guilt, because of his lifestyle. He was really in a lot of suffering and torment himself.
Now, a lot of people, a lot of women, let me say this, when they find that a husband has broken trust, even once, have a very difficult time putting it back together again, restoring respect, restoring a trust factor. You find out that Ricky has in fact been in relationships with probably a number of other women. How did you handle all of that?
Terry, I couldn't do it by myself. And I didn't do it by myself. Andy had reintroduced me to the Lord, and I was able to look at my circumstances and to look at my husband through God's eyes. And I was able to see him not with eyes of judgment and criticism, resentment, and unforgiveness, but with eyes of God, who saw the good in him and knew that in his heart, Ricky was a wonderful man, and God had a plan for him. And if I just believed in God and continued to see the good in my husband, that God would make it all right. And he did. God took he put the forgiveness in my heart. So today it's as if it never happened. Ricky's a new man, I'm a new woman, and we have a trust and an intimacy for one another that only God can put inside a marriage.
Now, Andy, you didn't just make a phone call and come back the next morning and say a quick prayer in the backyard. I mean, the Lord really called you to an intense friendship and support role here. How did that impact your life?
Well, my fiance at the time was Ricky's producer, and he had produced all of Ricky's hits, had signed Ricky. So what happened was, there were times when not only did I feel as if I was betraying Steve, but he felt that I was. There were times when he felt that I was being more loyal to her than I was to him. And I tried to explain to him that I was trying to be loyal to God, and that I knew that she would go under without someone really there for her. And I had to do that, but there were times when she would say, "Please don't tell anyone about something that she was feeling or something that she knew," and I would have to make a choice. And I always chose to be true to my word, and if I said no, I wouldn't tell anyone. I didn't, including Steve. And there were times, actually we broke up over it. Not over that exactly, but because of the strain in our relationship. And I remember thinking, well, this is a nice how do you do, God. Thank you very much. You know, I go to help Betty, and this is what happens to me. But he was faithful, and he brought us back together.
Betty, you talked about the fact that the next day, Ricky came home and said, "I don't love you anymore, I don't want or need this relationship." When and how did your relationship begin to turn around then?
It was a long period, one of struggle and a lot of terrible things that went on. About a year and a half, actually. And it took that long for God to reach Ricky. But Ricky rededicated his life to God and was able to let go of the alcohol. So God not only gave me my husband back, but he gave him back to me a better man and a godly man.
At one point, I understand that he was actually so low that he was contemplating suicide. How did he handle that, and how did God reach him? How did God touch Ricky's heart?
During that whole period, Ricky kept telling me, I've got to come to grips by myself. I've got to do this myself. I've got to get control of my life myself. And I knew in my heart that he couldn't. I knew he needed help. He needed God's help. He needed professional help, actually. And there was nothing I could do to convince him, but that night that he really totally reached the bottom and he saw himself that he couldn't do it. That's when he was looking for his gun. He wanted to end his life. And that's the night that he cried out to God and said, I can't do this, but I know God can.
And that's the place that seems that we all have to get to, is the place where we let go of trying to fix it ourselves, trying to be good enough to measure up to whatever we think God's expectation might be. Here you are on national television, and you're talking about things that a lot of people are going through, but would be uncomfortable sharing publicly. You guys are not only here, but you're in bookstores all over America with She Stays. Why did you decide to write about something so personal?
Well, Ricky and I had gone public on a couple of television shows, and the letters that we received from thousands of men and women who are in pain and who are suffering and hurting, we knew that we needed to get an answer to them, or at least witness to them. We don't know all the answers, but look at what God has done for us. And he can do it for you, and he wants to do it for you. And that's why we put this in a book, to be able to reach even more people.
Well, Andy, I know that you've also written a song that's called She Stays that you recorded with Ricky, so we want to listen to some of that song from the CD called Common Ground.
She stays, she gets down on her knees and she prays, looks at the ring that he gave her, so one more time she makes up her mind and she stays.
That's from the CD Common Ground, and the song is called She Stays, which is also the title of the book that Bettye and Andy have written together, and it's available in bookstores around the country. She Stays. You know, I think that one of the things that's so evident as I listen to the story of how God moved in your life, Bettye, how God used you and moved in your life, Andy, is that for those of us who know Jesus Christ, who recognize that we live in a world of need, of people who are looking for answers, we need to be willing to pay a price. And so I ask you, as you're listening to this story today, are you willing to do that for Jesus? You who are believers, you who have called yourself Christians for years, you know, for each one of us, we hold an answer. We hold a key to eternal salvation and to joy and peace in this world that, as Bettye said so eloquently, is not something that we can get for ourselves, that we can secure for ourselves in any way. And yet it's freely available to each and every one of us. That is the good news of the love of God. That in fact he has a plan and a purpose for each and every one of us, not just for these two women who are here, not just for those of us who are on this show every day, but for every single one of you who are hurting as you listen to this story today. So whether you're a believer who has been walking a lukewarm walk and you want to recommit your life to Jesus Christ, you want to make a difference in somebody else's world, or you're somebody who's hurting and you find yourself in impossible circumstances and you say, how could God even make a difference in this? We say to you today, God is able. And not only is he able, but the good news for you today is God is willing. He loves you. It's his good pleasure to work in your life. But first, you have to be willing to do what Bettye, what Andy, and what Ricky have done, what all of us in this program have done. Let go of trying to do it yourself.